the morning, although technically now it's the afternoon. So I'd like to welcome Liam Greenstead, who's a research fellow at the project officer on our FG Catalyst project, Change Mindset. And he's going to talk about Don't Tell Young Fellow Show Me How to Get Cleverer. Just my sort of program. So over to you, Liam.
Okay, I'd just like to start with a few thanks. I'd like to thank you for sticking it out to get this to this point, and listen to me. I hopefully won't finish you off fatally. I'd also like to thank Cecile and my colleagues in LTE for organising this brilliant day. I found it really, really useful. And finally, I'd like to thank the other presenters, because I really do feel like I'm coming in on the shoulders of giants. I want to talk, my approach to inclusivity in this particular presentation is a slightly different form of inclusivity that we've been talking about. It's less abstract and more intimate. It's partly about how we come as students and learners to feel part of an intellectual community. It's one element of that. It's part of how students experience the odd moment when they're not just part of the unwashed masses out there being spoken to, but actually engage in a kind of dialogue. So what this talk about really is about inclusiveness through feedback, how we can perhaps help students through the feedback we give, and it's based on this project, the Changing Mindsets project. I have a wee slide here. You don't need to write this down. This will be made available. But I just want to give you a sense of how important feedback is in the pedagogic process. Numerous studies show that if you have good feedback, you can improve grades massively, not just for some students, but for all students. It particularly works well for students who don't have previous experience in an academic environment. Good feedback really improves their results. The dropout rate, 45% in that study, accounted for by what students knew about their academic performance. In other words, if they knew where they could improve, they knew where the points where they could get on, they would do better, or they would be more likely to stay, rather. And then this one, which is really what the inclusivity element of this talk comes to. It's that experience of actually being listened to, being responded to. It's the closest most students come to a kind of conversation with their lecturer. It meets, as these writers say, it meets some very important psychosocial needs, which is being valued and being thought of part of the academic community, being taken seriously as a contributor to the academic environment. So they're the kind of things that frame this talk. The other thing that frames it are these myths and feedback. I'm sure we've all, I've used them, as I now in hindsight see, as an excuse from time to time. The idea that all feedback is good feedback. If you're giving feedback at all, the students are lucky to have you. Even if it's, this is a full stop, use it. But positive and negative and highly critical feedback can really hold students back, and this is where the Changing Mindsets element comes in. Another idea is that, and I was talking to somebody, I think she's here yesterday, about this idea that more is better, the more feedback you give is better. Not necessarily. It's the quality rather than the quantity, or as they used to say, it's not never mind the quality, feel the width. It literally is the kind of feedback rather than the amount of feedback that matters. Feedback with scaffolds. The other illusion that we operate under sometimes is that feedback is a one-way process, that it's us providing something for them, where we should in fact also be listening to what they say about the feedback they're getting. And the final one, which is the big one, and I know over the years I've used this more times, it's my shame than I care to remember, it's that students don't pay attention. You could write reams and they still make the same mistakes time and time again. In this thick skull, I've actually come to realise, in fact, it's not that they don't attend to it, they just don't know what to do with it. And that's my fault as a teacher. If they don't really understand what the feedback is about, if they don't understand the language it's couched in, if you're not providing them with an adequate explanation, then they won't. They will appear not to attend to it. Okay? So there's the kind of another framing. I'll get onto the talk now. What we try to do, as I say, is I'm speaking to the the choir here, preaching to the choir. We want to create conditions in which all students succeed. We bring into that certain stereotypes about students, about particular groups of students, and this often happens in relation to feedback. We stereotype through what we think are the needs of a specific group, and we focus in on possibly the wrong things. So we have to kind of rethink the way we improve our feedback strategies away from these assumed needs, if you like, and try to find out what the needs are. And this could be a rhetorical question, but if you want to answer it, where do we find out what those needs are? Okay, it's not a rhetorical question. We ask the students, right? Okay, but it could be a rhetorical question. The other thing we need to think about in terms of emotional intelligence, if you like, is if the only kind of one-to-one contact for much of the academic year you're getting from a lecturer is when they mark your paper, yeah, and you're heavily emotionally invested in what you're doing, then it's not just about the mark that you get. There is a sense, which is rarely, if ever, neutral, a feeling that students get about what they're receiving, what they're supposed to do with it. Things are opened up emotionally as well as intellectually by the feedback. And I think a lot of the time we don't consider that. Okay, so this is the project I work on. I'll just give you a quick idea for those of you who are unfamiliar with it. This is based on the work of Dweck, who argues that students or learners have, broadly speaking, fixed or growth mindsets. And these are about the views of intelligence. Some students believe that you're born with intelligence, some people believe that you're born with a certain amount of intelligence and that's it. Others believe that intelligence is malleable. I mean, these aren't new ideas, they've been around for over 100 years, right, all the way back to Binet in the 1900s. But they affect the way you think. If you think you're as clever as you're going to get, right, then that will affect your responses to things like feedback, because you will interpret that feedback as indicative or evidence of your own theory of your own stupidity stroke intelligence. On the other hand, if you have what she calls a growth mindset, you will see your feedback as a means of becoming cleverer. Right? So fixed mindset students, growth mindset students believe intelligence is malleable and it's developed through hard work and persistence, including the use of strategies like using the feedback. Fixed mindsets believe it's something that you're born with. Okay? And there's not much else you can do about it. That's about it. So, moving on. Everybody okay with that? The difference? So, Dweck and other writers in this field recommend that we look at feedback in a particular kind of way. And I'm just going to discuss those briefly. First of all, good feedback will point students towards areas of improvement. That's obvious. But in that context, the discourse is one in which we praise or point to process rather than product. Yeah? In other words, we don't focus on the mistakes that they made and correct them. What we look at is the way in which they've made those mistakes. Yeah? And we provide guidance, according to Dweck, which praises not the person for doing well or criticizes not the person for doing badly, but praises the process by which they've arrived at where they are, or criticizes that process. It has to engage with students directly. Mindsets, according to Dweck, are quite emotional. They contain elements of emotional intelligence because they're about identity. And if you think you're clever, you'll behave in certain kinds of ways. And if you receive criticism on the basis of just thinking you're clever to begin with, then what will happen is if you get praise criticism, it just confirms your hypothesis. You become your own self-fulfilling prophecy, and you don't need to do any work. Yeah, because you were clever to begin with. Right? So you have to engage with the student directly. The other element that she points to is that we need to set goals for action or reflection. Right? It's not just enough saying what's wrong with something. You have to give people somewhere to go. Yeah? And that can be directing them back to look at the feedback. A lot of the time what we do is we give our feedback and then it's fire and forget. Okay? So we need to develop techniques which encourage students to reflect on the feedback. Which is that. Okay, so that's the kind of Dweckian framework for approaching this topic. I've got a big list of suggestions, right? I'm going to go through them depending on the time. But as you can see, this is just a selection of the things that come from this basic premise. So I'm going to go through them one by one. But they're all linked to this idea. We're giving feedback as praise, we're offering students rewards for doing their work by praising them. It's the process that matters. It's how they got to be as good as they are, because we're also trying to teach them to get better. Okay, so first things first, you have to understand your own mindset. There is a very, very neat 3-question, 3-item survey that you can do. It's available online, which tells you whether you have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. Because the evidence suggests that lecturers, teachers who have fixed mindsets about student intelligence or about their own intelligence, they're more likely to judge the students as having low abilities. Right? In this particular study by Rattengood and Dweck, they found that what would happen is that having had this belief that students just weren't good at maths, yeah, and as a research method lecturer who taught stats, I was of that belief. Sometimes people don't like stats and therefore you make it easy for them. What they found was the students kind of went with that perspective. So instead of struggling with the stuff, they tried to comfort them instead of encouraging them to struggle. They tried to comfort them so they would use these kind of strategies like, and I've said it myself, you know, don't worry about it, not everybody's good at stats, you know, or maths or whatever. And the students responded. So they developed low expectations of themselves. In other words, in this particular study, if you think that your students haven't got maths minds, if you like, they've got fixed mindsets about that, then what will happen is that they will conform to your low expectations of them. Right? So imagine how frustrating that is. So the first thing is you have to understand your own mindset and how you approach your students, the attitude you have to them. Again, effort, not ability. As you can see in this study by Müller and Dweck, if you praise people for their intelligence, you give them a task, you praise them for their effort, then and ask them how they enjoyed the task. Students who were praised for effort enjoyed the task more than students who were praised for intelligence. If you ask them for pre-test them for performance or post-test them for performance, the ones who received effort praise did better the second time around. Okay, so she's shown there an effect which improves subsequent performance, and this is a very common theme throughout this literature. Effort praise rather than person praise produces better subsequent outcomes. It's like the students kind of go, oh, I thought I couldn't do that. You give them a test that shows that they can't do it, but you encourage them for the effort they put in, and when they come to do it again, they try a bit harder. Common sense, really. There's engaging with the student directly. Now, in the kind of crowded classrooms that we have now, it's very, very hard for us to engage directly with each student individually, just throughout the hours of the day. But we can do other things. We can change the kind of style of delivery that we use, the way we speak to them, but also about their work. So many students, and this is just one study, 2010, over the years I've seen loads of these. The students don't think that the lecturers read the stuff that they produce. Yeah? So they go, oh, that's the mark, fair enough, but one of the reasons they don't respond to feedback is because they see it as like something that's like rubber stamp. You know, like when you were at school, it was like, you know, must try harder. That kind of thing, just generic feedback. So you have to give students a sense that you've read their work, you engage with it. And it's not good enough to say, you know, you're really brilliant. This was a really good piece of work. You have to go much deeper than that. And as I say, the emotional importance of the dialogue, the sense that feedback is a dialogue rather than a monologue, for students is often more important. The feeling that you're actually engaged with them is more important than anything else. And it doesn't have to be, you know, you might not be when you've got 200 exam scripts to mark or 100 term papers to mark. You might not feel particularly engaged with each student, but you have to with the appearance of it. Okay. Again, constructive feedback. This is a common sense one, but with fixed mindset students, what they'll often do is they won't attend anything that challenges their sense of their own intelligence, for example. They'll ignore or they'll shy away from. Anything which praises them simply confirms their own sense of their own worth. It doesn't bring about change. And growth mindset students won't be helped by being told how good they are. What growth mindset students need is challenges. They are the, if you like, the adrenaline junkies of the intellectual world. They love the thrill of problems. The other thing is, and this goes back to style of expression, knowing that something is good or bad, think about this in terms of your own lives, isn't helpful necessarily if you don't know how A, it can be made better, if it needs to be, or B, how you can not make the mistake again. Often we couch our feedback in terms that the students simply don't understand, because we bring with it our understanding of things that they may not necessarily have in the same way. So another kind of technique, which is to offer specific information so that the student gets a very clear picture of what they need to do to get better. And also, as a corollary to that, to give them guidance for building on the things that they can do. Now, when I do this session with faculty here, I got my student mentors to go through all the feedback they've had over the 3 years they've lived at university and select the range of different kinds of feedback. And it's kind of interesting that the one that they all thought was really good feedback, and the one when I've shown it to faculty which they think is really good feedback, is from a growth mindset point of view the worst. Because it just says to the student, brilliant, I thought that was a really good essay, I really enjoyed it, and da. There is no attempt to make the student think about what they've written, to take the feedback and build on it. And yet university people's first impressions were, and as I said, I've done this with colleagues, some of you are here today, I think, and that's the one they always choose first, and then they sort of go, maybe not. Okay? Obvious. How do you do this though? How do you do it? Again, this depends on your circumstances. These are just some of the different ways. Direct instruction, obviously, if you can sit down with your students and say, look, this is how you read this feedback. This is what it means. When I say this, this is what you're expected to do. The same way in learning skills, where we're teaching students to analyse an essay title that they have to do. You break it down and explain the meaning of those things, like critically discuss or stuff like that, you know? If you have a chance, you know, and this is not always possible, get them to engage in reflective discussion, get them to think about what they're doing. One-to-one discussion, great, we have time for it. Targeting, pushing them to look forward rather than look back. This is an important one. Developing students' appraisal expertise, peer feedback. Many years ago I tried this, and I only did it once at that time because it was quite surprised me. Getting students to look at pieces of work and mark them. You give them an essay or something, and you give them a marking scheme or a set of learning objectives and mark them, or they mark each other's, and you help them to understand how these learning objectives, how this marking scheme is applied when you're doing it. Let them do it themselves, and you'd be surprised at the results that gets, the way in which they gain insight into the process. And that relates to the second one, is including students in the process. As I said before, right at the beginning, if we don't listen to what they're saying, and we simply go, they never pay any attention to us, well, we never pay any attention to them either. Okay, so we need to kind of get the sense in which, and this will work differently from course to course, module to modules, discipline to discipline, but we need to think about what is included in the process of feedback. Okay, really important part of the Changing Mindsets program, if you like, is this way in which mindsets relates to errors. Fixed mindset students see mistakes, errors as threatening to their sense of identity, their sense of self. Growth mindset students see errors as a spur for getting better. So what we have to do is prevent this performance avoidance on the part of fixed mindset students, because if they encounter an error, if they become fearful, they start to avoid the situations like anybody would. You know, if you've been bitten by a dog, you tend to avoid dogs, and that's kind of the way that fixed mindset students approach criticism. They suffer from what she calls appearance management anxieties. In other words, they have to constantly keep maintaining their front stage self in such a way that it works for them. And this, again, can lead to these things like performance avoidance. This is really important, and it's quite hard to do. You get to the state of focus students, or as Dweck would call them, fixed mindset students, and they need to be encouraged to understand that error is part of the process. In the presentations for students, I use a slide which has my famous failures, and it has Einstein and various other people, Michael Jordan and stuff, and they're all labelled failure, 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 but they're all recognised to be success, and that's a means by which students can come to identify with people who recognise their own failure and moved on. That's just a very trite way of doing it, I know. But it's about encouraging people to see through their own experience and through other people's experience that everybody makes mistakes, but they're not always disabling mistakes. And as I say, I've used famous failures. I've used in some situations, I've used my own student work as like an example of how not to do it. In other areas, I've used other people's work as well, just to show this is how you don't do it, and get them to analyse what's wrong with it. Cooperative learnings, we know all about these days. We know all about the importance of peer-to-peer education. Learning groups, learning partners, so that students can discuss the feedback they get. They can propose their own criteria, is one exercise. There are many ways, I'm sure you can think of far more than I can, ways of doing this, of getting students to actually put them in the chair where they're round together, looking at stuff and talking about it. Because the way we traditionally do it is a one-to-one thing, and some students won't share their feedback to each other because they're ashamed of it. Okay, so that's me finished. I think I'm bang on time.
Really, really interesting. My question is kind of two-part. Firstly, how do you identify fixed mindset students, and then how do you best engage with them? So I know you gave some things people do, but
it's interesting. Well, there is a Dweck has a survey for identifying students who have this approach to intelligence, and it's a kind of very basic measure. You can use it. 3 questions will do it, and it's simply, do you think the intelligence you have now is the intelligence you were born with? And if you answer yes to that, you've got a fixed mindset. It's that there are longer ones, but in the studies, the dozens and dozens of studies I've read now, it doesn't matter whether it's 25 item or 3 item. The students, the people doing it, kind of get what it's about, and if they answer honestly, then you can identify the 3 questions. Basically, do you think your intelligence can be improved? Is there anything you can do to improve? Very, very simple. Was there part 2?
and how do you engage fixed mindset students?
Well, through these kind of processes, in fact, one of the methods that I use in the Changing Mindsets project is we use this idea of neuroplasticity. So you basically say, look, if you think it's your brain, that's it. You know, here's a little thing or a series of ideas that show in fact your brain's changed and that the process of learning changes your brain. I mean, one example I use, which I found was really successful with students about that, is how many of them are learning to drive. And you get them to reflect on their process from when they started to where they are now. And you can see them start to go, oh, so what you're saying is this is all my brain adapting to all these different combinations and experiences and putting them together into a coordinated thing we call driving. With sports students really get it. Even the most fixed mindset sports students will understand. Right, practice, that's what happens when you learn a new discipline. Musicians, dancers, those kind of examples really, really work, I found so far.
Okay, one more. There's no time for one. So
you said it's really important to get the language right for feedback and praise the process and strategy and effort. Do you have any good phrases? Is there a phrase bank?
To be honest, I don't. I mean, I kind of, because I thought about this, and I, as I say, I use these three examples of what appear to be, all three appear to be good feedback. And I do the exercise of let's break it down and see how it's good from a growth mindset perspective. But you can usually, if you look at the feedback you have, and this is what I got my student mentors to do, is to look at the feedback that they had over the years and decide which was the most helpful. And it was quite interesting, that conversation with my student mentors about what in hindsight was more useful. So everybody loves being told they're brilliant. So from a direct point of view, that's no good. That it doesn't help the growth mindset, and it just confirms the negative elements of the fixed mindset. So it's about saying, look, you did this kind of well, but you need to develop this idea towards that point. So it'd be nice to have feedback, kind of bang, wouldn't it? It'd be great.
okay, thank you.
Well, it could be.
Yeah, quick one. Very, very much.
Thank you very much for that. I think that was really interesting, and it's very much a stimulus for our individual practice. But I wondered if you have any comments about what you're suggesting in relation to some of the pressures that are on us from the university and externally. So, for example, in relation to NSS and in relation to the pedagogic structures that are imposed by Turnitin.
Okay, well, I think, I may not have made that explicit enough. At the very beginning I said more isn't necessarily better. And the other thing was get the students involved in the feedback process, get them engaged with it. And there are lots and lots of techniques out there you do search that you can use which are appropriate for your group. It's really about, for me as a social sociologist, I suppose these days I'm not quite sure what I am. The really important part is understanding the conversation. And if you think about a conversation between equals and a conversation between unequals, the idea in the feedback process is to make the student feel more equal. And I think if you make the students feel more equal, then you won't have any problems with the NSS. I know that sounds like a good response, I'm sorry, but
Thank you.
I'm under the pressure tonight.
We do have to protest, so thank you very much. Thanks again, Liam. Oh yes, I will forget. On your way out, don't forget Liam's target. And have a pen in your hand ready. So, just a closing couple of minutes, just some thank yous, really, really important ones. First, thank you to Helen and Nathan for coming to all of this fantastic inspirational keynote. And we have a couple of thank you to everybody who facilitated the workshop and our LTE colleague timekeepers. Also, the conference organisers, and particularly Cecile, been here less than 4 months and you've put this together today, so thank you so much, and to Claire and Ruin, I don't think they're outside, but really biggest thank you of all is to you all for coming today and engaging in such an important agenda for us all. And I don't know about you, but it sparked lots of questions and ideas in my mind about what we do next about this, given all the priorities that Helen and Ron were talking about earlier. So this is the beginning of another conversation for us. And just before we finish, some dates for your diaries. There's the Medway Festival of Learning and Teaching, and their theme is around inclusive practice as well. So deadline for papers is Monday. And the other one is our next conference here. So our next student and staff learning and teaching conference. The first one was January, the second one is going to be January 2019, Thursday. So keep an eye out for more information around that. So that closes today's conference, and thank you very much again. Great morning. Thank you.